If you ever believed that Vancouver was the city where prosperity met compassion, then perhaps it's time to look again, beneath the skyline. Behind the glass towers and ocean view condos lies a fractured reality few dare to see. Tents crowding sidewalks in the Downtown Eastside, people curled against cold concrete, silent battles playing out in alleyways and shelters. What we admire from afar is just a facade. The real story is harder to look at, and even harder to live through. In this documentary, we will uncover Vancouver's breakdown, where fear grows, tents rise, and a failing system abandons thousands in plain sight. This is more than a housing crisis. It is a quiet collapse of care, dignity, and hope. And if you still believe in the soul of a just society, stay with us. Because behind the polished streets of Vancouver lies a truth few have dared to confront. Until now. For years, Vancouver felt safe, predictable, the kind of city where hard work meant stability, where people built lives, quiet, decent, ordinary lives. A job, a modest apartment, maybe a weekend by the water. But that illusion is gone. In 2024, over 4,000 people in Vancouver were homeless. More than 600 had no shelter at all. And behind every tent pitched under the overpasses is a story that once looked like yours. Liam had a daughter, a workbench, a union job. He showed up, paid his rent, paid his taxes. Until the company downsized, the rent jumped, and his savings couldn't stretch any further. Now he sleeps behind a pharmacy in Mount Pleasant, clutching a resume he can't submit. Because without an address, there's no form to fill, no phone call to take, no job to start. I did everything right, he told us, and still ended up here. That's the part no one wants to say out loud. That doing everything right might not be enough. That one missed paycheck, one illness, one landlord's whim can send it all crashing down. The system doesn't see Liam anymore. No ID, no address, no service. He isn't just homeless. He's become invisible. And when society stops seeing you, you stop existing. In Vancouver, sleeping on the sidewalk can get you fined. Parking your van overnight makes you a violator. Surviving is treated like defiance. And the longer you're outside, the harder it is to get back in. This isn't just a crisis of housing. It's a crisis of recognition, of people being erased, quietly, methodically, from the life they once belonged to. So ask yourself, what happens when it's your name they forget next? Maria wasn't reckless. She wasn't lazy. She was a school receptionist. For 12 years, she clocked in at 7:30 a.m., smiled at students, answered phones, paid her bills. Her life was quiet, predictable, ordinary until it wasn't. When her husband fell ill in 2023, Maria cut her hours to care for him. One missed paycheck became two. The landlord raised the rent. Then came the eviction notice, the appeals, the waiting list for public housing, 8 months long. And just like that, her ordinary life disappeared. Now she lives in a car parked 3 blocks from the school she once worked at. She covers the windows with towels for privacy. She skips meals so her husband can take his medication with food. And each night she worries they'll be fined just for parking there, for existing where they're no longer wanted. Sleeping in a car isn't shelter, she says. It's just a way to hide from being seen. In Vancouver, poverty doesn't look like chaos. It looks like someone trying desperately not to be noticed. Because when you lose your home, you don't just lose space, you lose permission. Permission to rest, to stay, to belong. Sleeping outside gets you ticketed. Parking too long gets you towed. Using a public restroom too often gets you followed. It's as if surviving has become a crime. This is what it means to be punished for falling behind. Not with bars, but with cold pavement, locked doors, and a society that says, you don't belong anymore. And for viewers, especially those who've worked hard their whole lives, it raises a quieter, deeper fear. If it happened to her, how far are you from the edge? Tasha once crafted floral arrangements for weddings, roses, lilies, and forget-me-nots. Today she sits on the edge of a rain-darkened curb, sketching those same blooms into a battered notebook, surrounded by the makeshift tarp she now calls home. She doesn't shout. She doesn't ask for anything. Her quiet presence is her protest. Her pencil, the only tool she has left to hold on to beauty. But still, the stares come, sharp, cold, dismissive. The kind that don't ask what happened, but rather what did you do? They look at me like I failed some invisible test, she says. Like I belong out here because I made the wrong choices. But I didn't choose this. In 2025, a citywide survey found that nearly 3/4 of Vancouver's homeless population once held stable jobs. They were not born into poverty, nor destined to fall through the cracks. They contributed, paid taxes, showed up for life, until the system, in subtle and quiet ways, stopped showing up for them. And yet, public perception rarely allows room for nuance. Instead, it reduces the crisis to stereotypes: addiction, laziness, danger. Labels that flatten people into problems, that strip away not only dignity, but also the public will to help. Stigma is more than a social bias. It's a policy enabler. When someone is seen as undeserving, services can be quietly defunded, support can be delayed, care can be deprioritized. A person becomes a statistic, then an inconvenience, then invisible altogether. Tasha's drawings are not just memories of a former life. They're resistance against erasure. In every line she draws, she's saying, I still matter, I still exist. But in a city where perception shapes policy, her quiet defiance may not be enough. Because once judgment replaces empathy, people are no longer seen. They are explained away. And the real question becomes, when did we stop seeing each other as neighbors and start seeing each other as mistakes? Vancouver has always been a city of public spaces. Libraries filled with quiet readers, parks echoing with children's laughter, sidewalks animated by community life. But now many of those spaces carry a different weight, a different silence. In 2024, a 12% drop in foot traffic was recorded in neighborhoods surrounding major encampments. Local businesses reported shrinking revenues. Residents avoided community centers. Some parents stopped taking their children to nearby playgrounds, not out of cruelty, but out of fear they couldn't name, only feel. This is how a crisis moves from the margins to the middle. Quietly, steadily, not with sirens, but with absence. One shop closes early. One youth program gets defunded. One neighbor stops waving, and then the infrastructure begins to shift. Libraries, once centers of learning, now double as informal day shelters. In 2024, visitor numbers surged by 25%, but not for books. People came for warmth, outlets, bathrooms, basic needs that no longer existed anywhere else. Staff were untrained to manage trauma. Shelves became resting places. The mission blurred. Community programs suffered too. Youth mentorship initiatives saw their budgets redirected toward emergency services. After-school activities vanished. For some teenagers, the only adults left in their lives were outreach workers rotating across overloaded caseloads. Even compassion began to crack under pressure. Shopkeepers offered coffee in the morning, then called security in the afternoon. Residents handed out socks, then signed petitions to clear the tents. Not because they stopped caring, but because they didn't know what else to do. This isn't just a housing crisis, it's a social unraveling. Public space, the glue of urban life, is stretching thin. And when the places meant to bring us together start pulling us apart, a city loses more than order. It loses its soul. When the center can no longer hold, the edges begin to fray. Vancouver's homelessness crisis hasn't just grown, it has spilled. As shelters fill and rents climb, more people are pushed beyond city limits into places like Burnaby, Richmond, and Surrey. But while the problems migrate outward, the resources do not. In 2024, Burnaby saw a 20% rise in encampments. Public parks, once quiet pockets of suburban calm, now serve as makeshift housing for those Vancouver has no room left to shelter. But Burnaby wasn't built for this kind of strain. It lacks dedicated mental health programs, crisis housing, and the outreach infrastructure needed to respond with care instead of force. Daniel left Vancouver's Downtown Eastside hoping for something better. He pitched his tent near a public path in Richmond, trying to stay invisible. I thought maybe a smaller city would mean less danger, he said. But there's nothing here either. No help, no space. Just a different kind of silence. This kind of displacement isn't a solution, it's a reshuffling. People are not moving towards stability, they're simply moving further from visibility. Surrey's 2025 survey revealed that 60% of residents felt public parks were no longer accessible. But behind that statistic is a deeper question. Who gets to belong in public space? And what happens when those who were once Vancouver's workers, its baristas, janitors, care aides, are treated as outsiders in every corner they turn to? Without coordinated planning, regional empathy turns into regional burden. Small cities aren't resisting help, they're simply overwhelmed. And without intervention, the crisis multiplies, dragging new communities into cycles of reaction, resentment, and retreat. A person without a home in Vancouver doesn't vanish. They resurface elsewhere, just a little more tired, a little more alone. It's easy to say the crisis is about homelessness, but that's just the final symptom. The real story begins earlier, before the tents, before the shelters, inside paychecks that don't match rent, inside wait lists that stretch into hopelessness, and inside systems that were designed for fewer needs and fewer people. In 2024, the average one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver cost $2,200 per month, up 10% from the year before. A detached home averaged $2.8 million. These numbers don't just price out the unemployed. They squeeze working families, retirees, students, even full-time employees who now sleep in cars between shifts. Clara's one of them. A single mother, she holds two jobs. One as a cashier, one as a home care aide. Together, her income is stable. But stability means nothing when 70% of it goes to rent and groceries cost more each week. "I never thought I'd be homeless with a work uniform in my bag," she said. The math isn't broken, it's rigged. And the services meant to catch people before they fall, they're overwhelmed. In 2024, mental health clinics in Vancouver had wait lists of up to 6 months. Addiction treatment facilities offered just 1,200 beds across the province. For many, asking for help feels like shouting into a canyon. Long echoes, no answer. Meanwhile, unemployment numbers hide deeper truths. The official 6.7% jobless rate doesn't reflect the 14.4% youth unemployment, nor the parents who work unstable gig jobs with no benefits, no protections, and no path out. This isn't about individual failure. It's about a city structured for exclusion. When rent becomes a luxury, healthcare a lottery, and full-time work no longer buys safety, it's not surprising people fall through the cracks. What's surprising is how many still believe they won't. For every story of despair in Vancouver, there is another, quieter, smaller, of people trying to push back. Not with grand gestures, but with persistence, with belief that change, however incremental, still matters. In 2024, the city launched several micro-home villages, 100-square-foot modular units built on vacant lots. They don't look like much from the outside, but inside they offer what most shelters cannot: a locked door, a socket for a lamp, a place to sleep without fear. For 200 people, that was enough to feel human again. At the same time, the Connect Home app linked over 3,500 users to available shelter beds, food banks, and temporary jobs. It wasn't perfect, but for many it was the first time in months that help arrived without conditions. Grassroots groups filled gaps the city couldn't. Urban Roots held pop-up care fairs, reaching 1,800 people. The Build for Hope campaign raised $1.2 million to fund community murals on modular homes, turning blank walls into symbols of reclamation. Yet for every solution, the demand grows faster. In 2024, shelters operated at 92% capacity almost year-round. Outreach workers ran out of hygiene kits by noon. Volunteers gave what they could, but the crisis didn't take breaks. Even compassion began to bend under pressure. A barista gave free coffee in the morning and called the city by afternoon. A parent offered socks but signed a petition to clear the encampment near their child's school. Not because they stopped caring, but because fear and fatigue speak louder in prolonged silence. This is the paradox. Communities want to help, but they're overwhelmed, under-supported, and unsure what help even means anymore. So what do we do with that? We teach. We teach that housing is more than shelter. It's stability, safety, and mental clarity. That public health begins at the sidewalk, not the hospital. That a city is judged not by its skyline, but by what it does with the people who no longer fit inside it. And most of all, we teach that even fractured compassion is still compassion. It just needs structure, policy, funding, leadership. Because the truth is, hope is real, but hope alone is not a solution. It's an invitation, one we must choose to answer before the silence chooses for us. There is no single solution to homelessness in Vancouver. No silver bullet, no overnight transformation. But that does not mean there is no way forward. It simply means the way is difficult and must be deliberate. The path begins with an uncomfortable acknowledgement that housing is not merely a commodity, but the base layer of human stability. Without it, no other service can function effectively. Not healthcare, not education, not employment. The conversation must move beyond shelters and toward long-term, affordable, and dignified housing that doesn't expire when the funding cycle does. To move forward, Vancouver must treat mental health care not as an afterthought, but as a pillar of prevention. In 2024, wait lists for counseling stretched for months while people spiraled in plain sight. Addiction recovery centers had too few beds and too many barriers. If the city can build towers that scrape the clouds, it can build spaces where healing feels possible. Economic policies must shift as well. Working full-time should not leave someone one rent hike away from living in a car. A living wage, rent control, and tenant protections are not radical ideas. They are the foundation of a functioning society. When the market becomes the only compass, cities lose their sense of direction and their soul. Public compassion must also be protected. Communities should not be left to shoulder crises alone. Outreach programs, mobile health units, hygiene stations, and neighborhood mediators are not extras. They are infrastructure. When properly supported, they rebuild not only lives, but trust between people who no longer know how to live beside each other. And perhaps most importantly, Vancouver must retire the narrative that this crisis is too big, too complicated, or too hopeless to solve. Complexity is not an excuse for paralysis. It is a reason to try harder. The path forward is not easy. It demands funding, courage, compromise, and time. But if cities like Vancouver, places with wealth, talent, and global attention, cannot lead, then who will? What is at stake is not just the lives of those sleeping in tents. It is the future of a city deciding what kind of home it wants to be. If these stories moved you, if they made you pause, reflect, or look at your city differently, then don't walk away. Subscribe to Globe Street's news and stand with us as we continue to uncover the truths most would rather ignore. Your attention is not just support, it's visibility. And visibility is where change begins. Thanks for watching.